Total War Warhammer 3 is a game about massive armies and big battles. But can you beat it without using any troops? Well, I guess the title gives it away. Hello, my name is Valerian Nishino and we're here today after a short campaign victory in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires with Sylvania using only lords and heroes. The live streams are linked below, but this is a summary of what my experience was in case you would like to try something different for your next Total War campaign. Here are the rules that I played with. Very hard campaign difficulty and hard battle difficulty. This is a setting that I think gives a good balance in terms of unit balance and challenge. And some of the things here will still apply to you if you're playing on Legendary, but let's be honest, if you're playing on Legendary, you don't need me to help you figure out any of this on your own. We're not allowed to recruit any troops, use Raise Dead, or recruit Regiments of Renown. With some other factions I would allow the use of my starting units, but in this case I didn't need them, so I disbanded all my other troops at the start of the campaign. Garrisons are fair game. However, if a battle involves only the garrison and no other armies, those battles are auto-resolved. For battles involving my own armies, I manually fought all battles that were not decisive victories or defeats. If the auto-resolve showed a decisive victory or defeat, then I have the discretion to choose whether to fight it manually or just auto-resolve. Now I did use a number of mods, and the one that has the most impact is probably recruit defeated legendary lords, which allows me to get legendary lords from other factions if those factions are wiped out. As a matter of fact, I did get the Red Duke, which makes the campaign a little bit easier, but you can replicate most of that with a normal Blood Dragon Lord as well. The No Imperial Fort Attrition mod and Realistic Public Order mod also affects campaign mechanics to an extent, but on the whole, anything that applies to this video and the campaign I did will also apply to you even if you're not using any mods at all. Now, the first thing to say here is that I really should have chosen Isabella over Vlad, primarily because she gives you 3 extra vampires, which brings us to our first main point. Not enough armies. Playing with a doom stack of heroes or even just a solo lord is something that many people have done, but it's usually in the mid to late game where you have high level characters, and you also have normal armies to supplement them. When you're only playing with heroes and lords, you hit the hero limit very quickly, especially in the early game. The stack with Vlad and Isabella in it can win almost any battle once we have Wind of Death, but we had to wait a long time to get to a second effective stack, which means that we are very vulnerable whenever Vlad is away. As a matter of fact, we were still on just 2 stacks at the time of our short campaign victory, compared to a territory of like 6 or 7 provinces. Now if I picked Isabella instead, I would have been able to start with 2 armies, maybe even get to a 3rd army before too long, and be able to defend Sylvania while Vlad does his work elsewhere. What we had to do was to recruit individual lords and park them in groups of 3 into our major settlements because of the limit to the number of reinforcing armies we can get. The problem is that low-level lords, before they get Wind of Death, Raise Dead, or even the Hunger, they're very weak, and we lost a lot of battles just trying to defend our heartlands. Which brings us to our next point: constant attacks. This is not an issue that's specific to these rules, because Sylvania is generally surrounded by enemies anyway. What is different is that your faction strength will be very low as opposed to a normal playthrough where you can fill your armies with free upkeep skeletons and zombies, which means that the AI will be more willing to declare war on you, and it will be harder for you to raise new armies to protect your own territory. As a matter of fact, while I sent Vlad into the heartlands of the Empire, I was constantly being attacked by a combination of Drufbar, Wargrove of Woe, the Golden Order, Averheim, etc, etc. It's hard to defend them with the 3 low-level lord groups that I mentioned in the previous section. Although I managed to hold on to Castle Drakenhof despite being besieged multiple times, I lost settlements in the Sylvania region multiple times, and I had to abandon my expansion a couple of times in order to put out fires with Vlad's stack, during which my western territory was entirely undefended. In short, there's less margin for error, and if I had to play this again, I would be more conservative about how I expand, and I'll probably deal with Zhufba first, and then move on towards the Empire. As far as buildings and technology are concerned, there's only one corner of the tech tree that really concerns you at all. The rest of them simply do not matter. As for buildings, we don't need any of the red recruiting buildings. Now as far as the advanced recruiting buildings are concerned, you can build the buildings that allow you to recruit White Kings and Banshees in minor settlements, but these do not increase your hero capacity. So it's better to just build those in the major settlements, while in the minor settlements, you'll be building the growth building, boneyards, for recruiting more necromancers, the income building, and then maybe a garrison or resource building. So that's it for the campaign map. Now here's what I learned in battles. What you can fight with and without Wind of Death is very different. Until you get Wind of Death, your battles often take quite a bit of time, because you're just wearing the enemy down with regenerating heroes, but you don't have a way to quickly deal damage, or to even the odds when the enemy comes at you with a large army. Now this isn't news for anyone who's familiar with vampire counts, but it's worth repeating here that your assessment of what a winnable battle is going to change significantly as your guys level up. With that said, I think you kind of reach critical mass with 5 or 6 units, which means lords or heroes, assuming that you have at least some useful spells. You might be able to win battles with Vlad and Isabella alone, but especially at low levels, you really want to have enough numbers and keep your guys together so that the enemy's attention is being divided up rather than ganging up on a single point. This also gives you a bigger Wind of Magic reserve and lets you cast your spells without having to worry too much about conserving them. This brings us to the next and probably the most important point that I found. Be careful about what mounts you put your guys on. If I had to do this again, I'm going to make sure that everyone stays on foot and not use any mounts at all, which in fact is what I did towards the end of the short victory. The reason for this is that the Warhammer 3 AI is very good at focusing fire on large single entity units. When your entire army is on foot and in melee, ranged units don't get a good shot at them. So they're eventually going to converge into a blob, taking out their main weapon, and also helps you wipe them out with area damage spells. Once you put your guys on horses though, that's big enough of a target for the enemy to start shooting. The ranged units are going to stay at range and try to shoot the mounted unit. If it's just horses, it's not that bad, because it's not a huge target, you take a little bit of damage, but it's not going to melt, and there is a benefit of having the mobility and the knockdown resistance. But the real problem here are flying mounts, especially Hellsteeds, and corpse carts. Hellsteeds are big and they fly, which makes them magnets for arrows. In particular, there's a problem with flying units that if they're not actively engaged in melee, even if they're just a short distance from an enemy, they're going to fly into the air, which puts a giant bullseye on their face. It also takes time for them to fly up and come down onto the ground. During all that time, they're being shot at, which makes them really bad for fighting Empire and Dwarf armies. They take a lot of micromanaging in order to survive unless you actually make them stay on the ground, in which case there's no benefit over Barded Nightmares. When you play with these rules, you really want to keep everybody in one place, again taking away a lot of the advantages of having flying mounts. Remember that most of your armies are going to consist of necromancers, who are not great melee fighters, so you don't want them to be exposed and having to fight on their own. But all that is nothing compared to corpse carts, which are absolute death traps for necromancers. Aside from being slow, they are big enough that enemy archers have an easy time shooting at them even when they're in melee. The little bit of toughness they get doesn't help one bit. What else is that corpse cart gonna do for you? Most of the bonuses don't mean a lot when your army is entirely lords and heroes. So do yourself a favor, take those necromancers off their corpse carts, otherwise you're going to have to watch them melt. I say this with one disclaimer though. At Sylvania, right now my enemies are the Empire, Dwarves, a little bit of Wood Elves, mostly factions that are based around ranged units. There's also a lot of Spearmen and Halberdiers, units that have anti-large bonuses. If I were playing against other Vampire Count factions, or against the Lizardmen, then I might consider putting my guys on mounts. Most important thing is that it prevents them from being knocked down by large units like dinosaurs. So this is not a one-size-fits-all situation, and you're going to have to look at what your enemy is and adjust your play. So let's go through the timeline up to turn 45 when we won the short campaign victory. We started out, as we all do, by taking out Tempelhof and taking all of Sylvania. The Vampire Count mirror favors us by a lot because the average Vampire Count unit isn't all that great in combat. All we need to do is have Vlad and Isabella focus on the enemy lord, take him out, and then just wait for the enemy to crumble. Siege battles are also not much of a problem. In fact, the towers, which are so annoying when you play normally, actually helps us out by causing friendly fire on their own troops. Thanks to the Siege Attacker trait, Vlad can attack walled settlements in one turn, and siege battles aren't really any different from an ordinary battle. Auto-resolve is not our friend because the computer just doesn't know how to judge battles like this. The result is that we've won a lot of battles that the auto-resolve didn't like, and we've also won a bunch of heroic victories. You just can't count on the auto-resolve to judge how a battle is going to go, but in general, 5 or 6 units is enough to win a lot of battles, and it's even better once you have a bigger variety of spells. Vlad's army at this time consisted of Vlad, Isabella, and 2 vampires, and we were able to very quickly win Vlad's first quest battle quite easily as well. Once we did that, I declared war on Stirland on turn 9, and in just 3 turns I had wiped out Stirland. Everything was great. It wasn't to last, however. While Vlad was occupied with Stirland, we got into a war with Jufbar in the east and the Golden Order from the south. They were followed by Vigilant and Aveland, which meant I couldn't easily pull Vlad back from where he was in the west. I had a few lords back at home, but they were low level, and in just a few turns I had lost the Moot, I had lost minor settlements in northern and southern Sylvania, and even Castle Drakenhof was under siege. Rather than sending Vlad directly back, I decided to have him go around in a circle, capturing all the settlements on the way as he comes back to Sylvania. We barely managed to raise the siege of Castle Drakenhof using the garrison, and we began digging in around Castle Drakenhof using the Red Duke, whom I had just gotten. The thinking was that I could lose everything else, but I'm going to hold Castle Drakenhof at all costs. Vlad destroyed Vigilant and Aveland on his way and took out most of the Golden Order's settlements. Over a span of around 15 turns, we took out our immediate threats in the eastern part of the Empire, and we secured Sylvania. Now I decided to take out Jufbar. Even though Reichland and Carrickern had both declared war on me, I felt it was more important to eliminate the threat in the east before turning our attention to the west. I had Vlad's army, and now I also have a second army, led by the Red Duke, with a vampire, a few necromancers, and boosted up with a couple of bloodline lords as reinforcements. Together we wiped out Jufbar quickly, even though we did take some losses in the process, mostly due to mounted units getting targeted by ranged. Wargrove of Woe declared war on me just as I was finishing Jufbar off, but with Reichland invading in the west and the Golden Order rebuilding, I thought it was a better idea to focus on them. Vlad also completed his second quest battle, and our main 2 stacks began chipping away at Carrickern, the Golden Order, and Reichland. That left solo lords to fend off Draika from the north, and again it was a struggle because we lost a lot of ground in the beginning, but eventually we held them off in a battle of pure attrition and a long hard battle at Castle Tempelhof. Draika was also involved in a bunch of other wars, their home province got razed to the ground, and eventually they sued for peace. Things went a lot smoother in the west, and finally we achieved short campaign victory by taking Altdorf and all of Reichland, wiping out what remains of the Golden Order, and eliminating Carrickern as well. So, that's the story so far up to short campaign victory. As things stand, we have all of the empires south of Midland, mostly stable frontiers, 3 armies, and we are ready for a new round of expansion. I do want to find out how things are like when we have access to bigger stacks, especially how we're going to deal with the endgame crisis. If you want to see how the sausage was made, my live streams of the campaign are linked below, and I'll continue to stream this campaign until at least the appearance of the endgame crisis. I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe, press the like button for me, and I'll see you again on stream or on video. Bye bye!